The road shimmered under the late Kentucky sun. The heat pressed down heavy and the air was thick. Matthew Evans sat inside his silver Mercedes, the leather seat sticking to his back. The air conditioner hummed, but it hardly made a difference. He glanced at the flat tire on the side of the car and then at his phone. No signal. He had tried calling for roadside help more than once, but nothing went through. Matthew was 76 years old, wealthy, retired, a man who had spent his life in finance. He was used to control, to things working in his favor. But now, stuck on a lonely stretch of road with no one around, he felt a twinge of frustration. He tapped his finger against the wheel, sighing at the silence. Then in the distance a figure appeared. A boy, no more than 13 or 14, walked steadily down the road. His t-shirt was faded from too many washes, his sneakers worn and dusty. There was nothing hurried about him. He simply walked with a quiet determination, his eyes fixed on the car. Matthew watched carefully. A stranger on an empty road can bring unease. Yet when the boy reached him, he gave a small, polite nod. His voice was calm, steady. "Got a flat, sir?" Matthew let out a breath. "Yes, I do. I was hoping for a bit of help, but there's no signal out here." The boy's lips curved into a modest smile. "I can help with that," he said, already crouching beside the car. "My grandpa taught me last summer." He opened the trunk without hesitation, pulled out the tools and set to work. Matthew stepped out, still uneasy but curious. He expected clumsy hands or nervous fumbling, but the boy moved with surprising confidence. His small hands worked the bolts smoothly, lifting, loosening, replacing. Dust clung to his jeans, sweat shone on his forehead, but his eyes never wavered. Within minutes, the new tire was on, firm and solid. The boy straightened up, wiping his palms on his faded jeans. "All done," he said simply, offering the faintest smile of satisfaction. Matthew reached for his wallet. He pulled out a neat stack of bills and held them toward the boy. "Here, take this. I really appreciate your help." But the boy stepped back, his hand raised politely. His voice carried no anger, only gentle certainty. "Thank you, sir, but I don't need anything. Just happy to help." Matthew blinked, stunned. He had spent a lifetime surrounded by people who wanted something in return. Money, favors, connections. Yet this boy turned away, offering nothing but kindness. Without another word, the boy walked down the road again, his figure shrinking with each step. Matthew slipped the money back into his wallet, but his chest felt heavy. He got back into his car and drove off, glancing again and again into the mirror, watching the boy fade into the heat. For the rest of the drive, Matthew's thoughts kept circling back. He had met countless people in his years of business, negotiators, partners, investors, but none had left him with this feeling. It was not the skill of changing a tire. It was the boy's quiet dignity, the way he carried himself without wealth, without fine clothes, but with something deeper, something rare. That night, Matthew sat in his grand study, surrounded by shelves of books he rarely touched. His dinner sat untouched as well. The silence of the mansion pressed in. He sipped his scotch slowly, but the taste felt empty. The boy's smile kept replaying in his mind. In all his years of success, every deal had come with conditions. Every act of help had an expectation. But that boy, Elijah, as he would later learn, gave without asking. Matthew leaned back, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in a long while, he felt restless. He could not shake the image of dusty sneakers, worn clothes, and a simple smile that carried more power than wealth ever had. He told himself it was a small thing. A flat tire. A boy lending a hand. Yet deep down he knew this was not small at all. This moment had shifted something inside him. And though he didn't yet know why, Matthew felt certain of one thing. He had to see that boy again. The house was quiet when Matthew returned that evening. His Mercedes slid into the driveway of his sprawling estate, the tires crunching softly over the gravel. Automatic lights flickered on, bathing the manicured lawn in a pale glow. From the outside, everything looked perfect, as always. But inside, Matthew carried a storm he couldn't name. He entered his grand study, the room he had always called his sanctuary. The walls were lined with polished oak shelves filled with books on finance, leadership, and world history. Rare first editions sat untouched, more decoration than knowledge. A heavy leather chair waited near the fireplace, and a grandfather clock ticked steadily in the corner. Normally, these things gave him comfort. Tonight, they only made the room feel colder. Dinner had been set by the staff, perfectly seared steak with asparagus and a glass of red wine. He sat down, knife in hand, but the food might as well have been stone. He cut into the meat, chewed, and tasted nothing. After a few bites, he pushed the plate aside and reached for the scotch. The glass was heavy in his hand, the amber liquid catching the low light. He sipped, but even that familiar burn couldn't distract him from the thought that gripped his mind. The boy, dusty sneakers, faded shirt, steady hands, that polite smile that didn't ask for anything in return. It had been hours since Matthew left him behind on the roadside, but the memory clung to him like a shadow. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. All his life he had dealt with people who wanted something. Investors who expected profit, partners who bargained for control, acquaintances who smiled only when favors were exchanged. But that boy had been different. He offered kindness with no strings, no deals, no expectations, just because it was the right thing to do. Matthew closed his eyes, but rest didn't come. The mansion was too quiet. The silence only made the boy's image clearer. He remembered the confident way he handled the tools, the calm voice saying, "I can help with that," and the way he walked away without looking back. For a moment, Matthew felt something he hadn't felt in decades. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't shame. It was a kind of humility, as if a mirror had been held up to his life and he didn't like what he saw. Hours passed. He moved from the study to the balcony, carrying the scotch with him. The night air was warm, crickets sang in the distance, and the stars spread wide across the sky. Yet Matthew felt none of the peace it offered. Instead, his mind kept replaying the boy's refusal to take the money. Why? Why would anyone turn it down? Surely the boy could have used it. His clothes spoke of a family that didn't have much. His shoes were worn thin. His hands were rough for someone so young. Yet he had smiled and said, "I don't need anything." Matthew shook his head, confused but strangely moved. He had lived long enough to know that money solved most problems. But maybe, just maybe, there were things money couldn't buy. Sleep never came easy that night. He dozed off for short moments, only to wake again with the same image in his mind. The boy walking down that road, fading into the heat. By the time the grandfather clock struck dawn, Matthew's decision was made. He couldn't just leave it there. He couldn't drive away and let the boy disappear into memory. No, he had to find him. He had to understand where that strength of character came from. The next morning, Matthew dressed not in his usual tailored suit, but in something simpler, slacks and a plain shirt. He wanted to blend in, to move without the weight of appearances. He grabbed his keys and headed back to that stretch of road. The sun was still low, painting the horizon in shades of gold. The fields on either side shimmered with dew. Matthew drove slowly, scanning the road, hoping for a glimpse of the boy. But there was nothing. Just empty fields, scattered barns, and the endless quiet of the Kentucky countryside. He stopped at a gas station, walked in, and asked the clerk if they had seen a teenage boy, tall and lean with worn sneakers and a faded shirt. The clerk shook his head. Matthew thanked him and moved on. He tried diners, small stores, and cafes along the way, describing the boy as best as he could. Most people shrugged or gave polite no's. Hours slipped by, and Matthew began to wonder if this was foolish, chasing the memory of a stranger. But then at a little cafe tucked at the edge of a town, a woman behind the counter paused. "You might be talking about Elijah," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "That boy's always helping folks. Lives with his mama over in Harlan." The name hit Matthew like a spark. Elijah. Finally, the boy had a name, a place, a thread to follow. He nodded, thanked the woman, and stepped back into the sunlight. The town of Harlan was still an hour's drive away, nestled deep in the foothills. The road stretched ahead, winding through hills and valleys. For the first time in years, Matthew felt not the weight of wealth or age, but the pull of something different, something he couldn't quite name. He turned the wheel toward Harlan, his heart steady, his mind racing. This wasn't over. It was only beginning. The road to Harlan curved through the rolling foothills of the Appalachians. Trees stretched tall on either side, their leaves whispering in the warm breeze. Matthew kept his hands steady on the wheel, but his mind raced. The cafe woman's words echoed in his head. Elijah. Lives with his mama over in Harlan. For hours, he had searched without direction, chasing the shadow of a boy. Now he finally had a name and a place. It gave him a strange energy, as if he were younger again. The Mercedes purred smoothly along the road, but Matthew hardly noticed the comfort. His thoughts were elsewhere. The town of Harlan appeared slowly, nestled between green ridges. It was no bustling city, just a quiet place of modest homes, small shops, and weathered porches. Children played barefoot near fences. Men in work boots leaned against trucks, talking in low voices. The streets were narrow, lined with faded signs that told stories of better years. Matthew parked near a small general store and stepped out. His polished shoes hit the cracked pavement, drawing curious glances. He wasn't used to standing out, but here his tailored frame and shiny car were out of place. Swallowing his discomfort, he asked a passerby about Elijah. The man nodded toward the edge of town. "That way, sir. Small house with a porch that sags a little." Matthew thanked him and followed the directions. Soon he saw it. A weathered house with peeling paint but a neatly swept yard. Flowers bloomed stubbornly in chipped pots by the steps. The porch sagged under its own weight, yet the sight of it struck Matthew in a way his mansion never did. It felt lived in. It felt alive. He parked at the curb and sat for a long moment staring. His heart beat heavier than expected. What was he even going to say? That he couldn't stop thinking about the boy who fixed his tire? That he had been moved by a simple act of kindness? It sounded absurd, even to him. But still, he stepped out and walked to the door. He knocked softly. After a moment, the door opened and a woman appeared. She looked to be in her early 40s, with tired but kind eyes. Strands of hair fell loose from a messy bun. Her clothes were simple, practical. She studied Matthew with a mix of caution and curiosity. "Can I help you?" she asked. Matthew cleared his throat, suddenly aware of how formal his voice sounded. "Good morning. I'm sorry to bother you, but I believe I met your son yesterday. Elijah, correct? He helped me with a flat tire." Her expression softened instantly. A small smile touched her lips. "That sounds like my Elijah, yes. Always helping someone." "I just wanted to thank him properly," Matthew said. "He wouldn't accept anything from me." The woman stepped aside, gesturing with her hand. "He's out back, fixing the fence. You're welcome to wait." Matthew hesitated only a second before stepping in. The air inside the house carried the scent of bread baking. The furniture was worn, the cushions sagging, but everything was neat. Family photos lined the walls. Elijah at different ages, a younger child in one frame, hand-drawn pictures taped carefully near the kitchen. The house was small, but there was warmth in every corner. He followed her through the back door and into the yard. There, near a leaning wooden fence, was Elijah. The boy was hammering a loose board, his brow furrowed in concentration. When he noticed Matthew, his eyes widened in surprise. "Hey, mister," Elijah said, wiping his hands on his jeans. "What are you doing here?" Matthew smiled faintly, though he felt strangely nervous. "I wanted to thank you again. You helped me when I really needed it, and I couldn't stop thinking about it." Elijah shrugged, his expression easy and genuine. It wasn't a big deal, but to Matthew it had been. Standing there in that yard, watching the boy work, he realized just how rare it was. He wanted to say more, but the words felt heavy. He looked at the patched fence, the sagging swing set in the corner, the grass thin in places. This was not a family of wealth. Yet the boy carried himself with a strength money couldn't buy. The back door creaked, and Elijah's mother stepped out, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Elijah, you better wash up before lunch," she called. Her eyes shifted to Matthew. "Would you care to join us?" "It's nothing fancy, but you're welcome." Matthew hesitated. In his world, meals were business deals or formal events. Here the offer was simple hospitality. For a moment he thought of declining, retreating back into the safety of his car. But then he looked at Elijah, who watched him with calm eyes. Waiting. "I'd like that," Matthew said softly. And so, he followed them inside, into a kitchen that smelled of roasted vegetables and fresh bread, into a home where mismatched chairs crowded around a small table, into a space where warmth and sincerity hung heavier than wealth ever could. He sat down, feeling out of place in his clean shirt and expensive watch. But as Elijah grinned and pulled out a chair, Matthew knew he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The kitchen felt warm and alive. Steam rose from a pot on the stove. Fresh bread cooled near the window. Elijah's mother moved with quiet speed, setting plates and glasses on the small table. The chairs did not match, but each had a cushion someone had sewn by hand. Matthew sat down slowly, careful not to scrape the floor. He took in every detail. A faded calendar, a jar of nails near the sink, a drawing of a bridge taped to the fridge with the word dream written in a child's careful hand. Elijah washed his hands at the sink and slid into the chair beside him. He looked clean and bright, hair damp at the edges, eyes steady. Matthew felt a small new kind of nervousness. He had spoken in boardrooms with 1,000 eyes on him. He had argued in front of judges and bankers. Yet this simple table made him feel young again. It made him want to watch his words. They bowed their heads for a short grace. The words were simple. Thank you for food. Thank you for today. Thank you for the strength to keep going. When they lifted their heads, Elijah passed the bread. His mother served roasted carrots, potatoes, and a small dish of chicken. The smells were clean and honest. Matthew took a bite and felt the work behind it. He tasted time. He tasted care. Elijah asked about the car, how old it was, how fast it could go. Then he asked about engines. He wanted to know how pistons moved. He wanted to know how parts fit without breaking. His questions were not random. They stacked one on another like blocks in a tower. Matthew answered what he could. When he did not know, he admitted it. Elijah nodded, pleased by real answers. So you want to build things, Matthew said. Elijah's mother looked up with a quiet pride. He does, always has. He fixes more than he breaks now. She smiled and motioned to the fence outside. He keeps us together. Piece by piece, Elijah grinned. I want to be an engineer one day. Bridges, houses, things that last. Things that make life easier for people. Matthew felt the words land inside him. He looked at the bridge drawing again. It was not perfect, but it was bold. There were notes in the margins, measurements, arrows. He remembered being 12 and taking apart a radio with a butter knife. He remembered hands that worked hard. He remembered a father who said, try it, and a mother who said, do it with care. What do you like best about building? Matthew asked. Elijah thought for a moment. When the line is straight and true, when the door closes clean, when something I make does what it should, it feels right. Matthew set down his fork. He felt a kind of ache he had not felt in years. He had chased numbers for a lifetime. He had chased deals and exits and wins. He had built wealth, yes, but when had he last built something that held weight in a storm? When had he last stood under a roof he helped raise? They talked about school. Elijah liked math and shop. He struggled with essays but worked hard. He volunteered at the church pantry on weekends. He mowed a neighbor's yard for free because the man had a bad leg. He asked about college like a person looking at a far hill. He did not complain. He did not ask. Elijah's mother listened more than she spoke. When she did speak, her words were steady. She managed hours at a small clinic and picked up shifts when someone called in sick. Money was tight, but she would not say it that way. She said they made do. She said they were blessed in many ways. She said they had people who cared. Matthew felt something gentle but strong fill his chest. He wanted to offer help. The urge rose fast. He wanted to fix the porch. He wanted to fix the roof. He wanted to fill the pantry and set aside money for school. He wanted to act. He took a breath and chose his words. You changed my day on that road, he said to Elijah. You changed more than my tire. I would like to do something for you and for your mother. If you will let me. Elijah's mother paused. She folded the dish towel and set it down. Her eyes were clear. We are grateful you came. We are grateful for your thanks. We have managed. We do not need charity, but we welcome friendship. Elijah looked between them. We are okay, mister, he said softly. Others need more. I just did what I could, Matthew nodded. He understood the pride in those words. He respected it. He would not press. Not here, not at this table. He took another small piece of bread and let the moment cool. After lunch, they washed dishes together. Elijah rinsed. Matthew dried. Water ran warm over their hands. The work was simple and quiet. There was a comfort in the rhythm. A plate, a glass, a fork, each set aside in its place. Matthew noticed a loose hinge on a cabinet. He tightened the screw by hand. Elijah noticed and smiled. They stepped onto the porch. Sunlight lay across the yard in wide bands. A breeze moved the laundry on the line. The fence stood patched and brave. The swing set leaned too far to one side. Elijah's mother thanked Matthew for sharing a meal. The words were polite, but they carried weight. He felt seen, not as a man with money, as a man with a seat at their table. I would like to visit again, Matthew said. You are welcome here. she replied. He walked to his car and opened the door. He looked back and saw Elijah pick up the hammer again, tap, tap, tap. The line would be straight and true. Matthew sat behind the wheel and waited a long beat before turning the key. He did not plan speeches on the drive home. He planned steps, calls he could make, people he could trust, work that would help and not harm, help that would lift without taking dignity. He pictured that sagging porch. He pictured a roof that held sure. He pictured a swing that did not lean. The engine hummed. The road opened. The plan took shape like a frame on a clear foundation. He would show up. He would bring others who cared. He would do this the right way. Somewhere behind him, a hammer struck home. Ahead of him, the day widened, bright and steady. Morning broke clear and light. Matthew was up before the sun, a pad of paper on his desk, a pen moving in steady lines. He wrote names of people he trusted. He wrote what to fix first so the family stayed safe. Roof, porch, kitchen that worked hard, yard for a boy who liked to build. He called a local carpenter he had known for years. He called a roofer who did clean work and never cut corners. He asked for a foreman who could be patient with a curious kid. The name that came back more than once was Joe. Before any truck rolled, Matthew drove back to Harlan and knocked on the door. Elijah's mother opened it with a soft smile. He spoke slowly and plain. He said he had a plan, but nothing would start unless she agreed. He said every step would be her choice. Colors, layout, when to pause, when to keep going. He said the crew would be local so money stayed in town. He said the work would be done with care and respect. She listened. She asked clear questions. Where would the old wood go? How loud would it be? How long would strangers be in the house? Matthew answered each one. When he finished, she nodded once. We can try, she said. We will keep our say. He smiled. That is the only way. By midweek, trucks eased onto the street. Neighbors peered over fences with curious eyes. A dumpster settled at the curb with a thud. New lumber slid from a flatbed, the fresh smell of pine filling the air. Joe climbed down from a pickup, broad-shouldered and steady, a tape clipped to his belt. He shook Matthew's hand, then turned to Elijah and held out his palm. You must be the one who gets things done, he said. Elijah grinned and shook firmly. Sometimes, he answered, Joe set rules first. Safety glasses. No loose boards left on the ground. No one on the roof without a harness. He spoke like a teacher who expected you to rise to the level. Elijah listened hard, nodding at each point. Joe handed him a pencil and a short tape. You are my measure man today, he said. We start with the porch. He stretched a chalk line, snapped it in a blue cloud, and smiled. Straight and true, he said. Elijah repeated the words quietly, as if filing them in his chest. The old porch came down with careful rhythm. Pry bar under the boards. Nails eased free. No rush, no waste. Elijah gathered bent nails in a bucket and lined the good boards in a neat stack. Joe showed him a simple trick with string lines to keep the new posts in a straight row. He taught him the 3-4-5 triangle to square a corner. Elijah tried it himself, counting slow, checking twice, pleased when the numbers made sense in his hands. In the kitchen, choices took shape. Elijah's mother picked a soft light blue for the cabinets and a plain, strong counter that would clean easy and last long. She traced the arc of a new faucet with her finger and looked to Matthew. Simple is best, she said. He agreed. The old stove rattled when it lit. A replacement slid in on quiet rollers. The fridge hummed low instead of buzzing. The sound of the house changed from strain to steady. At lunch, Matthew did not hand out cash or speeches. He set up long tables in the yard and brought food for everyone like a work site should have. Sandwiches wrapped tight. Water cold enough to haze the bottles. Elijah's mother added a pitcher of lemonade and a pie she had baked that morning. Workers thanked her by name. She laughed and told them to finish the pie so it did not tempt her later. The crew returned that laugh and got back to the job with fresh hands. A quick rain drifted through that afternoon. Gray sheets crossed the hills. Joe and the roof team moved like one body. Tarps went up. Tools covered. Elijah stood under the porch and watched the way they worked without panic. Matthew watched Elijah, seeing the boy read the pattern of a good crew. No shouting. Just short words that moved the work along. By the second week, the roof lay smooth and tight. The porch stood strong on new footings. When Elijah pressed his palm to the rail, it did not shake. He smiled without saying a word. Joe handed him a small level and tapped the top rail. Check it. The bubbles settled dead center. Elijah's smile widened. Straight and true, he said again. Joe nodded. That is the song we sing. Inside, the rooms brightened. Fresh paint covered years of scuffs. Floorboards were sanded until the grain showed warm and clear. The old light in the hallway flickered, so an electrician replaced it with a fixture that lit every step. Elijah followed the wiring with his eyes and asked how a switch can break a circuit. The electrician drew a small diagram on a scrap, then showed him with a tester. Elijah held the tool like it mattered. There was one thing Matthew kept for last. In the yard, the old swing set leaned hard, chains rusted, one seat cracked. On a Saturday, a new kit arrived in boxes stamped with black arrows. Elijah helped carry the pieces into the grass. Joe opened the manual and then set it aside. We will build it by the book and by the eye, he said. Holes dug, posts set in concrete, braces checked with the level. Elijah ran the impact driver under Joe's hand, the bit biting clean into the bolt head. Safety glasses on, feet set wide, no rush. When the final crossbar settled, Matthew saw something bright rise in the boy's face. Not just joy, ownership. Neighbors drifted over with paper plates and kind words. A woman from down the block brought a potted plant for the new porch. A man in a cap offered an old welcome mat cleaned and beat free of dust. The house seemed to draw people now, like a small lighthouse on the street. Elijah's mother thanked each person with the same grace she had shown on that first day. She hugged the woman with the plant and laughed at the mat's faded letters that still read home. As evening fell, the crew packed tools and tightened straps on the trucks. Joe wiped his hands and faced Elijah. Tomorrow we set the last rail on the steps, he said. After that we walk the job top to bottom and make a list of what still needs love. Elijah nodded, the pencil behind his ear like it had always lived there. He looked at Matthew and then at the porch and then at his mother standing in the doorway, the blue cabinets glowing behind her. Matthew felt the quiet settle in his chest, heavy and good. This was not a grand gesture anymore. It was work done right. It was a boy learning the feel of a true line. It was a mother opening a door to a house that now stood firm. He glanced at Joe, who gave a small nod that said the thing without words. The job was not just wood and nails. It was a lesson placed in careful hands. The sky turned gold, then orange. Elijah stepped onto the new steps and rested his palm on the rail he helped measure. He did not speak. He did not need to. The line was straight. The door closed clean, and tomorrow there would be more to build. Morning brought the clean smell of cut wood and coffee. The crew gathered in the yard, trading short greetings, slipping on gloves, and setting tools in tidy rows. Joe clapped once and pointed down the list Elijah had written in pencil. Final rail on the steps. Caulk the window trim. Sand the last rough edge by the back door. Test every light and every outlet. Elijah read each line aloud like a promise and checked the boxes beside them as the work moved forward. Matthew arrived with a box he carried like it was fragile. He set it on the porch rail and waited for the right moment. Not yet, first the walkthrough. First the work. They started at the roof line and moved down. Joe talked while his hand traced edges and corners. He showed Elijah how flashing sends water away from weak points. He pressed 2 fingers to the shingle edge to feel if it lay flat. He lifted a gutter bracket and let it drop once. The sound rang tight the way it should. Elijah's eyes followed every move. When Joe asked a question, the boy answered slow and careful, not to be right but to be true. Inside, an electrician clicked breakers on and off while Elijah stood with a small tester in his palm. Green light meant safe. Red meant stop and look again. Each click brought the same steady green. The kitchen glowed soft and even. The new stove lit without fight. The fridge hummed like a quiet room. Elijah's mother set a glass on the counter and ran the tap. The water came out clear and strong. She nodded once and set the glass down without drinking, as if saving the taste for later. They checked doors. Latches caught clean. Hinges did not squeal. A floorboard that used to groan under the hallway window now held firm. A painter showed Elijah how to look down a wall at a low angle so flaws show themselves. Elijah leaned, squinted, and smiled when the surface read smooth as a lake in early morning. By noon, the list had only 2 lines left. The last rail. The last sweep. Outside, Joe handed Elijah the driver. He pointed to the final bolt and stood back. The crew went quiet. Elijah set his feet, lifted the tool, and pressed. The bit clean. The bolt pulled tight. The rail settled with a soft, solid sound. Joe tapped the top with his knuckles and nodded. Matthew felt his throat warm and had to look away for a breath. The neighbors started to come as the sun leaned west. A boy from 2 houses over brought a jar of nails he said he did not need anymore. A woman carried a pie covered with a clean towel. The man with the cap set a cooler by the steps and told Elijah to keep the ice for later. Laughter rose and faded like wind in leaves. Someone turned on a small radio and then turned it down so voices could sit on top of the music like birds on a wire. Matthew caught Joe's eye. Joe gave the smallest tilt of his head, the signal that now was the right time. Matthew lifted the box and set it on the porch table. He opened the lid and pulled out a simple canvas tool belt, already broken in. The leather soft where it needed to be. The stitching strong where stress would live. He placed it on the table and added a pencil, a square, a tape that locked and released smooth, and a small level with clear liquid and a bubble that settled fast. He turned to Elijah and spoke plain. This is not payment. This is trust. Tools do not make the work easy. They make it possible. Use them with care. Use them for good. Elijah lifted the belt like someone holds a new book. He ran a finger along the seam and tested the tape's pull. He set the level on the top rail where he had driven the last bolt. The bubble found center without drift. He breathed out and wore the belt. It fit. Elijah's mother stood by the door with her hands folded the way someone holds gratitude when words could spill too fast. She looked at Matthew and then at the house and then at her son. When she spoke, her voice was low and steady. We had a house. This feels like a home. You fixed wooden wires. You also fixed something I cannot name. Thank you. Matthew answered without speeches. You did the hard part long before we came. You kept this place standing. You raised a boy who shows up. I learned that showing up is a kind of wealth, too. Joe cleared his throat and set another box on the steps. Inside lay a thin notebook with a grid on every page and a stub of a carpenter's pencil. He told Elijah to draw what he wants to build before he builds it. Draw the plan. Draw the mistake. Draw the fix. Elijah opened to the first page and wrote the date at the top in neat block letters. As dusk settled, Matthew sat with Elijah and his mother on the new steps. He outlined what would come next, and he did it with care. No pressure, no rush. On Saturdays, Elijah could shadow Joe's crew with safety rules first. In summer, there would be more hours and a fair stipend, so learning did not take from the family. School came first. Rest came second. Work came after both. Every adult here would answer to his mother's voice. If she said stop, it stopped. Elijah listened with his elbows on his knees and his hands folded. He asked what shadowing meant. He asked if he could rotate between crews to see more than one trade. He asked if it was allowed to keep notes on what he learned and bring them back with questions. Joe smiled the smile of a man who likes the sound of a good plan in a hungry mind. Allowed, he said, required. A breeze moved through the yard and set the new swing in a slow sway. 2 smaller kids from the block tried the seats under watchful eyes. The chains held. The ground under the ark was already wearing smooth. The sound they made was one of the oldest sounds in the world. That brief breath between going forward and coming back. Matthew felt a weight leave him that he had carried long and quiet. He looked at the house and did not see money. He saw lines that would hold. He saw a door that would close clean. He saw a boy whose eyes had learned to read level and plumb and purpose. When the first stars showed, the crew packed the last tools. Joe shook hands with the neighbors and promised to return in a week to check the work after the house had settled. He pressed a business card into Elijah's mother's hand and said that a good job is a job you can call back. People drifted away with good nights and small waves. The radio clicked off. The porch light came on soft and warm. Elijah stood with the tool belt on his hips and the notebook tucked under his arm. He looked up at Matthew with a mix of excitement and calm that only comes when a next step is clear. Matthew put a hand on his shoulder for a brief second and then let it fall. I will be back soon, he said. Not to fix, to stand beside. The yard grew quiet. The house breathed. The promise between them did not need more words. Tomorrow would start early, and it would start with showing up. Dawn came soft and pale over the hills. The porch light clicked off and the house breathed easy. Elijah woke before his alarm and opened his notebook. He dated a new page and drew a rectangle with careful lines. At the top he wrote, Saturday plan. Under it he listed what he wanted to learn that day. How to read a stud finder. How to use a speed square fast without losing accuracy. How to plan cuts so there is less waste. He checked the pencil point, then tucked the notebook into his new tool belt. Joe's truck rolled up with a low rumble. Matthew followed behind in the Mercedes, window down. one hand lifted in a small wave. They greeted the morning like workers do, with little talk and steady hands. Elijah's mother handed out paper cups of coffee and a plate of biscuits. She squeezed her son's shoulder and told him to keep his ears open. He nodded and tapped the notebook at his side like a promise. That first Saturday, Elijah shadowed carpentry. Joe showed him the frame of a small shed going up behind a neighbor's house. He taught Elijah to mark the crown of a stud, to place the curve all the same way so the wall settles straight. Elijah practiced until his marks looked the same every time. In the afternoon, he learned to read a tape from the right end without thinking. By evening, his pencil moved with speed that still looked careful. The next week, Elijah rotated to electrical. He stood with an electrician named Rosa, who spoke slow and clear. She laid out wire on a table and bent bright loops with pliers. She taught him the shape of a safe connection and the patience it takes to get it right. She had him repeat the steps with the power off until his hands made the same clean coil twice in a row. Only then did she let him watch a live test from a safe distance. Green light, no hum, no heat. Elijah wrote the steps in his notebook in box letters and drew small arrows so his future self would not forget. On plumbing week, a man named Dev taught him how to listen for trouble. He tapped a pipe with a knuckle and held his head near the wall. That hollow sound means air. That heavy sound means water sits. That rattle means a strap is loose. Elijah pressed his ear to the plaster and nodded. He did not touch a wrench that day. He learned the habit of a good worker first. Look, listen, plan, then act. Matthew did not hover. He stood back where he could see and be seen. He fetched water. He held a board when Joe needed a second grip. He asked questions that did not get in the way. In the quiet moments, he and Elijah's mother sat on the porch and spoke of school, of money, of time. Matthew kept his words plain. He offered a small scholarship for summer classes under a local fund. No names on a plaque, no speeches. She agreed because it was built to keep her voice first. He also called the town library and asked if they would host a tool library in an empty room. The librarian said yes with joy in her voice. Matthew paid for the first set of tools. The town put up a sign that read, "Borrow, build, return." One clear afternoon, Elijah noticed a broken step on an older neighbor's porch. The board had split and sagged, and the man walked around it with a cane and a frown. Elijah asked permission to fix it. He measured the opening, checked the stringer with his level, and cut a new tread from a scrap. He set it, checked the bubble, and drove the screws until the wood pulled tight. The neighbor reached for a wallet. Elijah shook his head and laughed. A glass of lemonade was enough. He drank it on the steps he had made solid, and the man sat beside him and told him about the store he used to run on Main Street. The story stretched past the ice at the bottom of the glass. Elijah's notebook grew thick with neat pages. He drew framing layouts, door swings, basic wiring diagrams, and small lists of what not to do. He drew a tiny bridge one night, just a sketch, with side rails and simple posts and boards close enough that small feet would not slip. In the morning, he showed it to Matthew and Joe. It could cross the wet ditch in the park, he said, where kids took long, muddy steps. Joe rubbed his chin. The span was short. The soil needed rock. The design was simple enough to do with volunteers. Matthew called the town office and asked to meet. At the next council meeting, the three of them stood at a folding table with Elijah's sketch and a little model he built from paint sticks. Elijah spoke in steady sentences. Safe, simple, materials listed on one page. He did not ask for money. He asked for permission and a Saturday when the park would be closed to traffic. The chairwoman looked at the model and then at the boy. She approved the plan and asked if she could bring her grandson to help. On build day, the park filled with neighbors. The tool library came alive. People signed out gloves and buckets and rakes. Joe ran the crew like he ran every site. Safety first. Measure twice. Keep the line straight. Elijah set string lines and checked levels. Matthew hauled gravel with a wheelbarrow and did not care when dust turned his shoes gray. By late afternoon, the footbridge stood over the ditch, simple and strong. Children tested the bounce with small steps and then bigger ones. It did not move. The chairwoman screwed in a small plate that read, "Built by many hands for every foot." Elijah blushed when someone tried to add his name. He shook his head and tightened one last bolt. Summer brought another good thing. Elijah's math teacher helped him apply to an engineering camp 2 towns over. Joe wrote a letter that spoke of hands that learn fast and eyes that see level. Rosa added a note about safety and patience. Matthew wrote a short line at the end. Nothing about money, only about character that shows up in the morning and stays until the work is done. The acceptance letter arrived in a thin white envelope. Elijah opened it on the porch with his mother and Matthew beside him. He read the first line twice, then laughed once, then cried into his mother's shoulder. She held him and said the words she had said since he was small. "You did this. You kept going." The weeks moved like a good job list, one steady line after another. Matthew found himself driving to Harlan even when no work was planned. He liked the talk on the porch. He liked the way a day felt when you ended it with tired hands. He sold a vacation place he rarely used and set up a quiet education trust in a local bank, named in honor of his parents, who had taught him to work before he learned to count money. He told no one beyond the family and the banker. He did not want that part to be the story. One evening after the camp, Elijah and Matthew took a slow drive on the same road where they first met. The sun dropped low, painting the fields gold. A car stood on the shoulder with a flat. A young father knelt beside it with a baby in the back seat crying. Elijah did not wait for a plan. He pulled in behind the car, put on hazard lights, and grabbed his belt. Matthew lifted the trunk of the other car and steadied the jack with his foot. The father kept saying thank you. Elijah smiled the same quiet smile he had worn that first day, and said the same simple thing. Happy to help. They finished fast. The father offered cash. Elijah waved him off and pointed to the baby, now asleep. The man looked at Matthew and asked how to repay. Matthew answered in one line, "When you can, show up for someone else." They drove on with the windows down. The night smelled like cut hay and warm dust. Elijah rested his arm on the door, the tool belt on the seat between them, the little level inside clicking softly with the road. Matthew glanced over and felt a steady peace he could name now. It was the peace of purpose. Back in town, the bridge in the park held firm under a string of feet. The porch at Elijah's house did not sag when neighbors sat to talk. The kitchen lights burned steady while his mother read in a chair by the window. The tool library sign picked up the last light of day. Borrow, build, return, people did. They signed tools out and brought them back with stories of small repairs that made life easier. The story ended where it had begun, with a car on a quiet road and a choice to help. A boy had turned down money and walked away with a clean heart. A man had followed that heart back to what mattered. In the end, nothing grand was shouted. Doors closed clean, lines ran straight and true, and in a town with a big heart, one act of kindness kept building day after day, in the hands that showed up.